Welcome, everybody. I'm Dave Edminster. I'm the Director of Security Architecture and Engineering at EVOTEK. I'm joined today by Eric Devansky, a Security Architect with EVOTEK, and Erin Ludert. Erin is a data scientist with brain fart is what it is. Erin, can you introduce what you do?
Yeah. I'm a data scientist at Abnormal
Thank you.
Security. So yeah.
I appreciate that. I do apologize for dropping that.
No worries.
Today, we're going to talk about email and specifically email security and a lot of the challenges that faces it. And as you can see in the subject that we've got there, it's email security today, that technology alone won't save you. So with that in mind here, everybody that's up here, and I think everybody attending, we've all been dealing with email our entire professional careers and probably just most of our lives at this point, depending on when you were born, right? And email is a real challenge. Eric was kind enough here to dig up some facts, and this one here, Eric, if you want to talk about it for just a moment, you're welcome to do so.
Absolutely. So I found this quote as part of the Trend Micro annual report, and I really like it just because it highlights the scope of the issue. 91% of the 62.6 billion threats blocked last year in 2020 were email borne. 91% of 62.6 billion is just under 57 billion threats that were blocked. And from one vendor, this really points to the scope and the size of the problem that email security has become. And it definitely points out the challenges that we're trying to overcome in the field of email security.
Absolutely true. And I think it's fair to say that every organization relies on email. It's a fundamental method of communication. It's been that way for, well over 20 years as a core piece of technology that all organizations rely on. Something we've all talked about too is the importance of, it's clearly important, but its sensitivity and the sense of urgency that comes with email when email's out or email's going wrong is something that we find pretty interesting. And I'd love to hear, Eric and Erin, some thoughts about that too, that as I was thinking about it, it seems like email is personal to people, that it's your email box, even if it's your company's, it's my email. And when something's going wrong or targeting it, that it's targeting me. And I think that's maybe fairly accurate to say. Whereas the servers, users don't think of the servers as theirs. They don't think of the infrastructure as theirs, but the mailbox is, and it somehow seems more personal.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have like our very personal, sensitive information on our emails, work emails. I'm going through the process of buying a home right now, and exchanging all of these very sensitive documents over email. Email is something that has given me quite a bit of anxiety, right? It's a big risk. And I think if you think about all of the news that you see about the kind of vulnerabilities that they uncover with Microsoft servers, for example, or iPhones, they found this vulnerability. Really, if you look at this statistic, that is a tiny fraction actually of your threat surface area, and they get a lot of news, but actually email is where you're facing almost all of your risk as a security organization.
And I think I'd read a statistic that around close to half of most account takeovers and account compromise and breach situations involve email. They may not be totally email, but email is part of the vector. Is that true? Is that accurate? What do you say?
Absolutely. I would actually say that I suspect that it's probably even higher than that. I think email is just so ubiquitous. We log into our emails in so many different places on so many different applications. And so much of the technology around email actually is just so antiquated, right? Like this is a technology that we, as you say, we've been relying on for, well over 20 years longer. And so a lot of what we have right now that allows access to email does not really have very good, security protocols. And, you add to that people having, poor email hygiene or poor security hygiene around like passwords, reusing passwords, not changing passwords frequently. It becomes a pretty major point of breach.
Right. Well, and it's compounded when people, when email's used as not only a point of communication, but a store of information. The things you could learn walking through somebody's email account or really garnering information from what's stored inside of there really keeps me up at night as a security professional.
And that's a good point in that we use email for so much, obviously what we're receiving in professional and personal capacities, but what we're sending too. And I think that's something that a lot of individuals and organizations overlook or don't think too terribly much about as far as their email hygiene goes, is everything that's been sent out, unless you've got some kind of process or policy in place to remove that, it's still there in your sent items. And it's ready for harvesting and to be scraped and to be exfiltrated by a bad actor in the case of an account compromise and account takeover. And that's just, data loss and, IP, et cetera. I mean, who knows how many compliance areas that really starts to impact, because do you remember everything in your mailbox that's been sent out? I don't. There's no way I'm going to be able to track all that. So,
and
go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say, if I was a malicious actor inside of your email account, I would want to see how you conduct business, how you respond to requests, how requests come to you, et cetera, and just garner all that, so much information from that.
Absolutely. So I think this harkens back to what we were talking about a little earlier, in that email was designed as a functional tool to move messages from point A to point B across a fledgling internet. It wasn't even the internet at that time. It was ARPANET, if I recall correctly. And that's it. There's no security baked in. There's no security concepts as a part of it. So it was wide open for compromise and for attack. And we all rely on that infrastructure. Every org relies on this infrastructure. So that leaves us in our situation today, where we have a fundamental technology that's inherently insecure, that has all of this laid over security on it. That's basically add-on. It's bolt-on, it's duct taped, it's baling wire to try to, and not to undermine that technology, mind you, but it's fundamentally sitting on top of an inherently weak infrastructure.
Absolutely. And that's a very nice pivot into how email is used as an attack vector. In things like the email address syntax, it's very, very easy to go out on the internet and determine who is, how your email addresses are formatted, and also how the first and last name position of people inside of your organization. So it's very easy to target those individuals should I want to launch a spear phishing campaign.
Right.
Yep. And on top of that, we have, many legitimate uses of like marketing tools that target email, right? So there are services that are meant for marketers that kind of will give information around email addresses and allow, for sending marketing information out to companies that is legitimate. And these actually get used by attackers, right? To get this information, they'll either just do a free trial or a stolen credit card and actually kind of repurpose these legitimate marketing tools to get some of this information, as well as what's just widely available on the internet.
Right. So it begs the question that how do we protect against that? And I'm sure everybody here on the call, obviously the three of us, but everybody listening and attending is familiar with the concept of email gateways, email security, in the sense that it's there and it's been overlaid on that. And that security is, I think, critical. It has to be there. It can't just be abandoned or not used. It's got to be there, because the volume of email that I believe I was reading in 2020, it's estimated that there was about 111 trillion emails, trillion with a T, emails sent worldwide that year. And that number's just growing. That's been the case since email's inception. But it does look like the percentage of email that is spam and malicious continues to drop every year. And I think it was about 25% was estimated to be straight up malicious and spam at that point in time. So volume's increasing, the kind of attacks are decreasing. The total number of attacks of a percentage is decreasing. We need the technology to do what the technology is good at, stopping the kind of payload attacks, the kind of malicious link attacks, things that email gateways are good at detecting and filtering out, right? But what else do we do around it? What's it not catching? What's not, what's working? Why are things still getting through, and why are people still getting popped?
And that's a worrying statistic, because what it really points to for me is that the technology is doing a good job of preventing, a hot link and somebody clicking on a hot link and delivering a malicious payload to their workstation that can then propagate through the environment, but that the style of attack is actually shifting and moving more toward the human element of an email attack.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember as well that the attackers, or the criminals that engage in this type of activity, these are smart people, right? They're human beings that are able to adapt, and that do adapt. So we've had these types of technologies in place for a long time now, at least the last, let's say, 10 years for, secure email gateways. And, they see the things, the attackers can see the things that these are very, very good at catching, and they pivot to using, another strategy, right? So the landscape is ever evolving because you have a human adversary, if you will, that adapts to the barriers that you put in front of them.
Right. So every time there's a technological wall that's put in place, the bad actors are finding a way to go over it, go under it, go through it.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, how do we deal with that? Because I think the real common piece that we've been discussing for a while here, and I think touches on the subject of this, is why the technology alone won't save you. The technology can't catch all those things. It's like you were saying, Erin, it's ever evolving, and they're smart, and they're looking at what, they have access to the same technology that's being used for email security. So they can actually kind of reverse engineer it. They can observe what's going on and find ways to get around it. So what do we do? I think it's, the real big part here is the human element, like we were just beginning to discuss here, is humans are being targeted. And I'd love, Erin, if you could talk a little bit more about how bad actors are targeting humans individually and specifically, and how that's being weaponized.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the slide that we have here actually gives a good, kind of segue into that, about this introduction of a new technique, new over the last, say, like 5 years, that attackers are using, which is social engineering, right? Which is allowing them to get information, publicly available information about a company and who works at that company, to like specifically reach out and target these people. So kind of speaking to what is the threats that are out there. If you think about it from the attacker's perspective, this pivoted approach, which is bypassing traditional security measures, is actually much easier for the attacker, right? It doesn't actually take that much work. They go and find, for example, thank you. This is actually a wonderful graphic here. They go and find publicly available information about who is the CEO of a company, who is the CFO, for example. Who would those people normally talk to in an organization? And then they will craft a targeted email that they manually send to a target individual to try to extract information or get them to directly engage with them and get on the phone, right? So in terms of the signals that you would see here for catching like one of these types of emails, if they're sent in the kind of the larger volume ones that we see, what we see often happen is there will be the display name will be changed to match that of the CEO, for example, but the email address may remain the same. Or alternately, a more sophisticated approach is to actually spoof the email of the person being impersonated, the CEO or the CEO. And so in this case, like in this graphic, as you see, you have this contact that comes in that looks like it's coming from the CEO or CFO. Anyone in the C-suite, I think, is commonly impersonated. It gets the employee to engage with them. They have some kind of back and forth, sometimes on the phone, and then they're able to kind of exfiltrate money in a very direct way that actually has a much larger payout than the historic ways of doing, phishing or malware, right? And so in terms of like, what do you do with, given that this is the problem, right? What do we do about this? From the human side, these can be very hard for a human being to recognize, right? If the email address itself is not spoofed, you can tell. So if it says, Michael Smith, CEO, VIP at acme.org, but then the email address is 12345.gmail@gmail.com, a human can be trained to identify that. A human can also be trained to be suspicious, right? Like, you shouldn't be quite so eager to please. The normal reaction if your CEO emails you is to do exactly whatever he or she says right away and to try to, to please company leadership. But maybe you should second guess whether it's common for this person to contact you, right? But what I think we found is that human beings, by their nature and that eagerness to please, they're actually not very good at doing those, taking those steps of being suspicious, right? It takes a lot of training, and even still, these attacks are extremely successful, which is why we're seeing them really rise in volume. So I think what abnormal security is trying to do is to try to bridge that gap with new technology, right? To be able to identify these signals that are there, but might not be so easy to spot for the human, and kind of take that emotional element out of it and really evaluate whether this is a normal and safe communication.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, technology is going to be key in this space regardless. As long as email exists, there's going to be a need for technology solutions to help prevent it, from the low-hanging, easy things to stop, from domain falsification and those kind of things like that, all the way to as much phishing and individual attacking that the technology can solve. And then I think we're moving into some of what I see in the chat space there around user training. Obviously, the technology is key, not stopping. User training, it becomes a huge thing. I think that's the other cornerstone of why the technology alone won't save an individual or their organization. The users, like you were saying, Erin, they've got to go through some training and some understanding can help them understand the need to do that. But as was pointed out in the chat by Lainey, it was actually there's a lot of pushback among the users around, hey, I have to now do more training, I have to do more responsibility, and I don't want to do it. Nobody wants to do those kind of things. So finding that as happy a ground as you can between the technology itself and user training, I think is a challenge every org faces and will always face as long as this kind of solution's in place. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, both Eric and Erin, your thoughts around that.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, the users are your last line of defense. When the user is presented with an email, a malicious email, it's the result of something slipping through the tools, and that's the kind of the last line of scrutiny in a lot of cases before somebody clicks a malicious link, sends a malicious money transfer, wire, whatever activity an attacker is trying to drive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the other things that users push back on, which is a fair criticism, is they don't want to have all of the onus of responsibility to be on them for that, right? There was a case I believe it was in the UK about a year ago, where I believe she was a secretary, was sued by her company for engaging with an attacker and actually losing the company money. And she did win that case. Luckily, they found that you couldn't hold her personally liable. But you can imagine the anxiety that an employee feels, where they feel like if they're personally responsible, on the one hand, you want to be helpful, you want to be a good employee and respond to people's requests for assistance. On the flip side of that, you have this incredible responsibility. And so you really do have to have kind of both sides of that coin, is doing the company doing the due diligence to put in as much controls in place as they can to safeguard their employees. And then additionally, right, making sure that there's training in place for employees to identify risks, but then also just having procedures in place that kind of takes the pressure off of the employee to make those decisions. So for example, if you have a wire transfer, the CEO says, I need to have a wire transfer that needs to go through today. Is it already procedure in your company that you need to have a phone call or a video, better yet, a video chat with the CEO before that happens, right? If that's the policy, then you take the pressure off of your employees to try to not be the personal point of friction in that transaction, right?
Right. So creating policy and educating the users on that it's, this is the procedure, this is the policy and the process you go through, so that you're not stuck as an end user, as an individual contributor, having to guess, am I doing the right thing or not? Do I tell somebody? Do I not tell somebody? Do I click on this? But actually going through that. And that does mean that the organization is going to have that policy and have to go through educating their user base and those that matter on that policy. And like you were saying, Erin, proper controls in other parts of the organization, like financially, if a check is going to be written or a PO written or whatnot, if money is going to move, what two different sets of financial eyes are going to look at that and approve that and validate that? At minimum, those kind of things, right? So I think that's key, that an organization's got to have those in place. And that's not technology. That's not even IT per se. That's not even that org or email. That is an organizational need that they've got to do around it to protect themselves from fraud and from these attacks, because they come up. So those are great points, that we've got the technology pieces that it's good at, the technology that's emerging that it may be okay at, and then user training, and then process and policy. And so to talk about some of the user training aspect too, I think there is some technologies that can help with that, like basically user education processes and self-phishing campaigns, like where a number of vendors do this, where you have false phishing attacks that come into your org. Users have to, do they act on it? Do they not? Do they click on the link and it goes through some training if they clicked on a malicious, a fraudulent link? I think that can help. But I also know that there's fatigue in a lot of the users. If you go through that a bunch, you're like, I don't want any more of this. I've done this a bunch, and it happens. And sometimes you click one by accident. You're like, well, now I got to go through the training again. So I think that's a balancing act, where I did see in the chat here, I thought it was a really good call out by multiple people trying to do that process, because it can be successful, but gamifying it somehow so that it doesn't feel quite so like punishment to the users. And I'm wondering if either of you have experienced those, or you have thoughts around that kind of approach or that component.
I think giving the users a mechanism to report. So making it feel like, you haven't done something wrong. Mm-hmm. You get a phishing email, or you get an email that you just think is suspicious, having a mechanism to report that up and to understand, okay, this was malicious, this wasn't, but ultimately to that employee, I'm doing the right thing. I'm responding to this, and I'm reporting it, and it just kind of underscores Dave's point that this isn't just a technology and IT or infosec problem to be solved. This has tie-ins to every single facet of an organization, and so understanding and having just like the clear reporting process is key to tackling this problem as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of the abnormal, suite of products is something that we call abuse mailbox, and it basically is, exactly that. It's a tool for where end users are able to, report messages that they think are suspicious to their company's phishing, mailbox. And then they can they will get a response back, right? That message will be analyzed, determined whether this is, a malicious attack, whether this is spam, or whether it's safe, and have a response back. So they have that kind of feedback loop and that education, that kind of ongoing and continuing education of that one that you thought looked a little janky maybe was actually safe. This other one that you reported was actually malicious. And for our security analysts that use the product, they actually have a web interface that they can go into and see who are your top reporters at your company and how good are they at actually, identifying malicious attacks. What percentage of their reports end up being, malicious attacks versus being safe. So it gives the tools for the security analysts to also just see all the time in real time, not just during the security awareness training periods, but all the time. How are your employees doing at recognizing these type of attacks?
That's a great call out there. And now we've got the additional process policy pieces there, and we have a technological means to educate users, hopefully. And the points that you brought up, Eric and Erin, that you I think really supported, the ability to report it, and easily report a phishing or a malicious email. And there's a lot of applications and solutions that will add a button in your mail client to report this. Or sometimes maybe it's a header, or it's something in the mail itself that actually gets inserted, an actual top of the email or whatnot, report this. I think those are making it easy for users to report this is key, because they won't. If it's a hard hurdle to clear, they're not going to do it. They're just going to continue on with their day, delete it, move on, and just ignore it. And then I really like the gamification aspect that you just talked about, Erin, around not just showing like, here are our worst performers of individuals, but really here are our best. These are the people that have reported the most. Here are the individuals that have never fallen for any of our phishing campaigns. Good job. And here are the individuals that have done a great job of actually reporting actual phishing and malicious emails that get to us, great job. I think that kind of like a leaderboard, if you will, for great behavior. I think it could be a really positive way to motivate people. And as Matt Schufeld said in the chat here, more carrot, less stick to the approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that positive reinforcement, right? If you've gone through any kind of educational or training psychology, positive reinforcement is always, a better tool to use than, a negative reinforcement or a kind of not like a punishment, but it is, right? Essentially, it's kind of a shame on you. You clicked on that link, as you said. Now you have to go through this additional training, which feels like a punishment because it's more time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people feel like they're being punished and that they're having to go through more work because of that single action, which is true, but nobody likes that. And then they start becoming avoidant of being participating at all in any of these things. They just move on, which help.
And I like the point about having a leaderboard because, it's not just about you reported it and it's a malicious email and good job, but rewarding something looked suspect and you reported it by itself is a win from a security standpoint. Yeah. I'd rather review 25, 50, 1,000 false positives and find the one that is actionable and malicious versus not review the actionable and malicious one.
Mm-hmm. And I've been at orgs where we would get to the point where the culture now started to understand the severity of email attacks, and then we're getting basically paranoid about emails that would come in. Like, is this a spam? Is this phishing? Is this legitimate? And it started getting to a fair amount of false positives reported by users. But to your point, Eric, I'd much rather do that and then be able to tell them, nope, it's legit and you're fine. And then anytime, like 100 times that, than once the other way around. And yeah, it's inconvenient for your IT team and your email administrator. To be clear, it is going to add some work to them, but that work is worth it compared to the alternative.
Yeah, we definitely have found, in our research that users, unfortunately, do have a very hard time being able to identify, actual malicious attacks, especially these kind of VEC attacks, and separating those from just maybe an annoying spammy email, right? Even internal company newsletters that maybe the team didn't do a very good job of making it look pretty. People go, what is this? And they immediately, kind of report it. And so I think most of the reports that we see from end users are false positives. They are actually safe messages, possibly gray mail, possibly, newsletters. But, especially when we do POCs with organizations, I think that issue of visibility that you mentioned, Dave, it really comes up a lot. That, companies will think that, no, we have a really good handle on email security. I feel like we've got it kind of buttoned up. And then when we actually start to provide that visibility into, these are all of the attacks that your existing security solution is missing. These are all of the attacks that your end users have been engaging with, actually. It always is a little terrifying for the security team to see how much activity it still manages to get through.
Yeah. And I think that highlights on the point and the need for any technologies and solutions you have in place to be well maintained. You can't just set it and forget it because it's going to be out of date in a relatively short amount of time. And that's, unfortunately, there's the care and feeding that goes into the solution. If you want that technology to work correctly, there's a fine tuning involved, and there's updating, and there's evaluation. Maybe it's once a year. Is our solution doing what it needs to do here on the technical side? And then the user training piece. Are we seeing good user adoption? Are we seeing the users engaging in this and doing this well? So yeah, I think it's worth highlighting that it's not a set it and forget it thing, and it never really will be. We're always going to be relying on technical experts and technologies that are being well maintained, and on our user engagement. So I think it's important for everyone to have all of those pieces in any kind of organization. And yeah, that's just for email, right? That's the nature of security today, is there's not really just one slice of any technology, any solution or security that can be addressed and left alone. It's organizational, it's technology, it's user training, it's remediation, it's maintenance, it's documentation, it's all of these things in those engagements. So yeah, it's a real challenge, and it's never going to, in my opinion, get less, that much less challenging. So especially with so many advanced actors attacking the way they are and being diligent and being smart about it. Because your points earlier, Erin, I think are spot on. they're not just like setting a bot and doing this. It's targeted and it's intelligent people who are really working hard to make this happen.
And I think the other point to mention there is just not only making sure your tools are updated and are effective, but making sure your tools are also the most effective tool to tackle the problem as the threat changes, making sure that you're purchasing and making sure that you're using the most current tool set to address the most current threats is key.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, like we said, the attack landscape is changing because these are, you know, human adversaries that are adapting. And so, you know, the technology has to adapt to that as well. And the technology should also provide you with as much visibility as possible into, you know, all parts of, you know, what your security, you know, landscape looks like. So like the approach that we are using at Abnormal Security to try to address this is, you know, instead of having the secure email gateway solution, you know, which intercepts email traffic in advance of it landing in your inbox, we employ an API approach, right? So we subscribe to notifications from the API, and we can actually monitor all ingoing and outgoing communications, right? And establish a baseline for what is normal communication patterns for your company, and then flag anything that is outside of that norm, right? And so that employing that kind of zero trust philosophy helps us to stay on top of these kind of evolving threats, right? If we understand what is safe and normal, that landscape actually evolves less quickly, right? Normal communication patterns normally look a certain way, and so what we're able to identify is those kinds of attacks that are very well crafted, you know, are very, very hard to identify from the end user's perspective, but will have some indicators that the machine can find, right? That you wouldn't necessarily see with the human eye, taking all of these types of things, you know, these signals into consideration, even things that, you know, like and a human won't necessarily be looking to see what IP address is this person emailing me from, right? So in the case of a hijacked vendor thread, right, we see lots of times where there's a conversation going back and forth between two people, accounts payable and accounts receivable on two different organizations. And this entire time there's been an attacker, maybe for months, lurking in one of the accounts, right? Like just monitoring communications, as you mentioned before, Dave, maybe having some exfiltration of understanding everything that's going on at this company and waiting for the right time to interject into the conversation, right? So for end users, they're on a one email thread. They're in the middle of a conversation. This isn't a new email that arrived in their inbox, right? This is all part of an ongoing conversation that they've been having with a person that they know and trust at this other organization for months, possibly. And then all of a sudden, one of the emails will actually not be coming from that same person. It's coming from an attacker in Nigeria, right? And the end user won't see that, but your security solution should be able to see that and to flag that immediately, even though it's a conversation thread.
Yeah, as we see those technologies evolving and being adopted, I think they're going to be key to helping prevent that. And you mentioned the account takeover part too, and that actually spurred a thought that I was realizing too. Part of it was the discussion in the chat around going back to user training and how do you get people to engage in that. Obviously, we talked about more carrot, less stick. So there's that I think is really important. User feedback and an easy way to report. I would actually say something that I have found important to try to is to make users understand that they do have skin in the game, that this matters to them. It's not just to the org, but it's to them personally. And the areas where I've seen that resonate the strongest, and it's unfortunate, but it's true, is when like a direct deposit change is made by a bad actor using email or using some attack, because then the individual, they lose a paycheck, and whether the organization makes that right, where it reimburses them, gives them another one, what have you, that's going to vary from org to org. But the person's going to know quick they didn't get a paycheck, and the org isn't, because if the org they shouldn't have executed on it if it was just on email, mind you. They should have policy in place, again, much like you were saying, Erin. They should have a policy and procedure in place to prevent that and double check, but a lot don't. And they go through the process, they make a direct deposit change, and then someone doesn't have a paycheck. And I think that's one of the ways to really try to help end users in an organization understand this matters to you personally. It's not just inconvenience. It's like, hey, this can really mess things up for you as a specific individual.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of those types of direct deposit VEC attacks. I think someone was mentioning in a thread the gift card type of scams as well, right? Where the CEO is saying, can you go out and personally buy me $1,500 worth of gift cards and I'll reimburse you. Yeah. And of course, they're not going to be reimbursed, and very likely the company won't reimburse them for that mistake as well. And I mean, for some of these larger vendor fraud transactions, sometimes this can be enough to sink a company, right? It be so much money lost that it does really impact the employees. There's the embarrassment of having engaged with an attacker, but it really affects not just the bottom line of the company, but the bottom line for the employees as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have about 8 minutes left, and I know we could kill those 8 minutes just in continuing to have a conversation, but we do have a few questions that came up, and I'd like to try to address those here with the time we have remaining. Laney Rush asked, what do you think about moving from username and passwords to magic link email sign-ins? I can't decide if it's progress or just different Pandora's box. I'm inclined to think it's just another Pandora's box at the moment, that technology isn't fully mature, and a lot of it I think depends on how it's adopted, how it's implemented. But also, Eric and Erin, your thoughts?
I tend to agree with you, Dave. I think this is, every solution has vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. Magic links are no different. So I think that the way that these magic links work is they, do a token exchange, and it is possible for tokens to be compromised. And we've seen this happen, right? This is sometimes easier, sometimes harder than compromising a password. So they're not foolproof. Maybe better because you take out some of the human elements, so you don't have people saying my password is password 1, right? You can't control them. You can revoke tokens and reset them easily, but they're definitely not bulletproof.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think you shift the mechanism of attack, but it's certainly not a silver bullet to solve the password issues and other issues that you see around the problem that's trying to be solved with going to a passwordless strategy.
Yeah. So another question we had in here from BenQ. We also need to balance technology and the user experience. Many email security products are overly aggressive in blocking messages. Check your spam folder has become very common. Any thoughts? And yeah, I think that's true. There's a lot of false positives on spam that's been moved. The gray area is pretty big, and every organization has the means to refine that, but they have a lot of competing interests between security trying to prevent things, maybe a marketing team or a sales team or who whatnot saying, hey, I need these messages, they're legit, and trying to find that happy middle ground when you have your own user base internally arguing about what's spam, what's legit. So thoughts?
I think oh, sorry, go ahead, Erin.
No, go ahead, Eric. Absolutely.
I was just going to say, I think as tools get better, and as you take an AI-driven approach to identifying a malicious email, I think that false positive, so to speak, is going to become less and less. But on the back of that, I would also say, as a security practitioner and understanding the risk involved with email, I would rather be wrong about something being delivered to a spam folder than wrong about something being delivered to a user's inbox. And I think just changing that user perception that it going to spam is not necessarily a bad thing is very important as we tackle this challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely agree that I think the new emerging technologies are doing a much better job at having higher efficacy for, catching these sophisticated attacks while not creating, business disruption. But, there are two problems that, you both touched on, which is this kind of confusion of borderline messages, as you would say, such as like, is this spammy versus is this a cold outreach from a prospective customer, right? And then the other issue that does happen is that user fatigue. So if a banner is inserted on a message that says, hey, warning, look out, this is someone that doesn't normally email you, people have started ignoring that, unfortunately. And so, if they have a flood of emails, if the default is to say, well, we're going to catch all attacks, but you're going to have to dig through your spam folder every day, that's definitely not, going to be, you're still going to have users ending up engaging with attacks because they're starting to ignore the warnings that are put in front of them. So you do have to constantly iterate and make sure that your security product is getting better with time and not degrading.
Yeah, I think that rolls back to maintenance in a number of cases too, where you're fine-tuning over time. You're going to have adjustments you're going to have to make in your tools to try to minimize those, but still block or at least move to spam the things that you think are spam or sometimes malicious. So it's unfortunately there is no silver bullet. If there were, none of us would be here talking about this subject at all because we'd all have that silver bullet. It'd be worth its money by far. And one other question I did see in the regular chat here, again, Lainey asked, I'd love to hear folks expand on evaluating your technical email tools. What metrics do you consider key to consider? And that's a big question. I don't think we definitely don't have the time to go deep in it, but what are some high level metrics, Erin and Eric, that you would be interested or you would see applicable to that question?
Well, I can definitely say what we have seen customers use to evaluate abnormal. And I think it depends really on the pain points for your particular organization. Like what is most important for you, that it can be, your existing security solution is creating a ton of false positives, right? Where there's still attacks getting through and we have so many false positives. And then of course, that is the thing that you really want to be measuring, right? Is how many false positives do your security analysts actually have to triage every day? Or is this solution going to reduce that workload? Another pain point that often coincides with that is these BEC and VEC or vendor fraud attacks that are continuing to get through. Are you able to stop those sophisticated types of attacks? So I think the things that mostly we see people evaluating abnormal security on are those things. Do you make our security analysts' lives easier or worse? And do you actually do what you say you're going to do and stop these really sophisticated attacks? There's less concern, I think, about the bulk spammy type things that the traditional solutions are actually doing a good job. But Eric, interested in your experience, how you would also evaluate a solution.
I agree wholeheartedly. I want to see the false positive rate, and I'm interested in also the rate of malicious emails that it doesn't catch, and understanding why it didn't catch those, and then understanding if that's a gap in the feature set or the configuration set. And ultimately, when assessing a tool, I want to judge its efficacy across the type of emails and the type of threats that our organization is currently facing.
And I would say that the only addition that comes to mind for me, because what you both said there is spot on, in my opinion, are the attacks that are getting through, the kind of things that you're seeing users report or deal with. Is the solution, if you're evaluating a new solution or an update or what have you, is it capable of addressing those and really talking with the vendor? How do you tackle these kind of malicious attacks? These kind of sextortion was one, and I mean that if you've been in the email space, you saw it. That one was getting through a lot. And how do you tackle that? What are you doing now? And if they don't have a solution, it's what's your ETA on a solution for that, because it's a very specific attack type. So I'd say those are kind of things to evaluate. Now that said,
and I would add as a last thing to that as well, I think you should consider as what kind of level of customer service you're receiving from this vendor, right? If you have a problem, do you know who you're going to talk to, and do you know what kind of a response they're going to give you, or is it going to be, submit a comment in a field here, and then no one's going to get back to you? So that's kind of a piece that isn't often talked about, but I think is important as well.
Right. I think that's key, is to know your what your support vector is for the vendor, the solution you've got, and do you know who your rep is? Because if your support isn't getting back to you, how do you get that escalated? That said, we are at the top of the hour. We're a minute over. So Eric, Erin, thank you both very much for joining me here on this presentation. I've really enjoyed speaking with you all. I hope everyone that's been here has enjoyed it as well. And I believe the next sessions will start in 5 minutes. And with that, I wish you all a very good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.